On August 15th, 1914, a lone ship known as the SS Ancon sailed from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean in less than 8 hours. It was the fastest journey ever between the two seas. The SS Ancon was the first ship to cross the Panama Canal.
100 years after Lewis and Clark, a new era of American exploration was beginning. With the frontier discovered, the West settled, and nowhere left in North America for expansion, the United States continued the idea of manifest destiny and looked across its borders for a new land to influence. With President Theodore Roosevelt, America became an imperial power that sought to create a canal that would join the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans.
If somebody wants to transport something from the East Coast to the West, it's easy to send it through the canal.
This was the United States' plan to assert economic and military dominance in the international realm. Although the Panama Canal was a major engineering and political accomplishment for the United States, its legacy was one that both cohesively and corrosively affected the relationship between Latin America and the United States.
The United States encountered the people of Panama and Colombia by fomenting a revolution to ensure U.S. control of the Panama Canal Zone. On January 22nd of 1903, the Hay-Haran Treaty was ratified by the U.S. Senate. Colombia, however, rejected this treaty because they did not feel that the compensation was high enough to allow the U.S. to have control over the canal zone, a direct threat to their country's sovereignty. Angered by Colombia's rejection of the treaty, the United States plotted with Panamanian revolutionaries to make Panama its own republic. The U.S. sent a fleet of warships known as the Great White Fleet to intimidate the Colombian government and ensure its cooperation. The United States also gained control of the country's railways to prevent Colombian soldiers from getting to Panama City, the site of the rebellion.
The United States is the single great power in the Western Hemisphere, and Roosevelt was the first actually to make an issue of that and kind of to throw his weight around.
By cutting off the Colombian soldiers, the Panamanian revolutionaries were able to rebel with relative ease, and the Republic of Panama was established on November 3, 1903. Anti-imperialists in the United States saw this as an unlawful act of war against Colombia. The New York Times labeled the military action as an act of sordid conquest. Theodore Roosevelt's big stick policies were seen by many as a form of gunboat diplomacy, unbecoming of a civil nation.
He didn't care. He basically said, well, Congress is going to go ahead and debate, but meanwhile we're building the canal. That was the way he handled these questions generally.
Big stick diplomacy was the manner in which the United States assumed power in Latin America. Using military intimidation, the United States took advantage of Colombia, undermining their autonomy and ignoring their jurisdiction. Roosevelt used nefarious tactics to divide the country in order to build his canal, leaving a lasting effect on the map of Latin America. Soon after Panama declared its independence, the United States recognized the country and made plans to ratify a treaty. On November 18, 1903, the Hay-Benau-Varilla Treaty was signed by both countries, giving the United States control over the canal zone.
With ownership of the canal zone, the U.S. began construction. After many setbacks to the project, John Stevens became the chief engineer of the canal in 1905. The Panama Canal was like no other canal before it. The Suez Canal in Egypt, for example, had flat terrain and was at sea level, making it a straightforward engineering task. In the Panama Canal Zone, however, builders encountered hilly terrain, dense jungles, and rocky mountains. To address the difficult terrain, Stevens explored innovative construction methods, including the creation of a series of locks, levees, an artificial lake, and an artificial valley known as the Culebra Cut, all allowing the canal to flow through the rough terrain of the Panamanian Isthmus without difficulty. There was also the problem of transporting workers and materials along the 50-mile canal. To remedy this, Stevens built a railroad next to the canal. With this practical idea, workers and materials were able to arrive promptly, and as a result, construction was more efficient. The Panama Canal became a marvel of the 20th century that forever changed the standards of engineering due to Chief Engineer Stevens' exploration of previously unimagined and unattempted construction methods.
While the engineering challenges overcome by the project managers broke new barriers in the construction world, the medical advances were equally impressive. Significant medical innovations in the canal zone were responsible for saving thousands of lives during the canal's construction. Colonel William C. Gorgas was the lead doctor for the project in Panama.
And at a time when there was still dispute among scientists over the basic question, how disease was transmitted. Nowadays we think it's obvious that various kinds of tropical illnesses are mosquito-borne, but this was still disputed in the early 20th century, and people thought it was miasma. That is, they thought there was something in the water, there was something in the air that made people sick. And Gorgas was really on the forefront of science and saying, well, no, I think it's mosquitoes that are making people sick. I think it's mosquitoes that carry these illnesses.
Gorgas eradicated the mosquitoes that transmitted malaria by setting up mosquito nets, draining swamps, and fumigating the jungles to rid the zone of mosquito eggs.
Nobody got malaria in Panama when I lived there, and the reason was that they were following Gorgas's plan for keeping these tropical diseases down.
Several years before, the French had neglected the health risks to their workers. They did not acknowledge the dangerous effects of the jungle diseases, which resulted in over 20,000 deaths. By the end of the project, 5,000 workers died due to diseases and accidents, the majority of which occurred between 1904 and 1906. As a result of Gorgas's hard work, the workers faced a fatality rate of less than 1% between the years 1906 and 1914. Without Colonel Gorgas, the death toll would have certainly risen. Since 1906, Colonel Gorgas's exploration of the cause of malaria has saved millions of lives, not only in Panama, but throughout the world.
Despite the scientific advances made in the canal zone, a grim reality remained. Black workers were 4 times more likely to die than their white counterparts. The canal's most dangerous jobs, such as detonating dynamite, were given to minorities. Hundreds died due to a lack of labor regulations. White workers and black workers were also paid differently. Black workers were compensated in silver coins, whereas white workers were paid in gold. Though the building of the canal was an incredible engineering accomplishment, it was made possible through the exploitation of minority workers. With American imperialism, the United States spread elements of racism on an international level, resulting in Jim Crow-era treatment of minority workers in Panama. This mistreatment contributes to the negative aspects of U.S. intervention in Latin America, as America's actions reflected those of a greedy empire that looked down on other cultures and ethnicities.
After a decade of hard labor and over 5,000 deaths, the United States finally finished what it had set out to do. It gave America the path it needed between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans to assert military and economic dominance. When the canal was opened for international use, however, it was nowhere near the front page of the newspapers. The beginning of World War I was unfolding in front of the eyes of the world, making the canal a footnote in international news.
Following its completion, the Panama Canal operated as a U.S. entity for decades, causing friction between the two countries. A 1964 riot between Panamanians over whether the United States had the right to fly the American flag in the canal zone led Panama to sever all diplomatic ties with the U.S. However, in the 1970s, the American government ratified the Torrijos-Carter treaties, returning the canal zone to Panama in 1979 and mandating that the canal itself be given to Panama by 1999. The ratification of these treaties signaled the end of U.S. intervention in Panama.
Since 1999, the canal has been run successfully by Panama. In 2007, the government of Panama commissioned an expansion of the canal to accommodate larger ships. The new canal will be wider, deeper, and have 2 new sets of locks at each end. An international consortium of countries, including the United States, helped engineer and fund the project. The expanded canal is expected to open in June of 2016. The Panama Canal's construction facilitated encounters among politicians of Latin American nations, allowed for the exploration of new medical practices, all of which led to an exchange of ideas among different cultures. From Roosevelt to Obama, the Panama Canal has been an important aspect of U.S. foreign policy since its inception. What was once a divisive landmark of U.S. imperialism now symbolizes a unifying entity that gives any nation in the world the ability to travel between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In 1914, the SS Ancon became the first ship to cross the Panamanian Isthmus. In June of 2016, a new ship will become the first to cross the expanded canal. The only question is which ship will represent the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the Panama Canal.